Out of all of the legends in the Harry Potter series, the tale of the three brothers has always been my favorite. It had an intriguing story, a powerful villain, and it talked to a treasure that would leave anyone on a wild chase. But not everyone believed it. Many magic folk dismissed it as just a bedtime story, a myth meant to scare children at night rather than reveal any real truth. But what if it was real? Who were the three brothers, and more importantly, could possessing all three objects truly make someone the master of death? I know you're curious, but I hate to tell you that there's an even bigger mystery waiting for you at the end. So stay tuned till the end, and please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Alright, let's dive in. The story starts with three brothers traveling together until they come across a strange river, almost sinister looking. There was a reason this particular river looked so dark and deathly. It had taken a number of victims and was guarded by death itself. So when these three brothers tried to cheat it by making a magical bridge across the river, Death wasn't very happy. Death put on a show of delight at the brothers' cleverness and pretended to be impressed. It even went so far as to offer each of them a gift, anything they wished for. The three brothers were smart. They didn't waste their wishes on unicorns and rainbows. Instead, they spent them on tricking Death. The elder brother asked for an unbeatable wand, powerful enough to easily surpass other wands, so Death gave him the Elder Wand. The middle brother asked for the ability to resurrect the dead, so Death gives him the Resurrection Stone. The youngest brother didn't want to be in debt to Death, so he asked him to grant the ability to hide from Death. In return, the younger brother got the invisibility cloak, and the three went their separate ways. The eldest brother bragged about his Elder Wand so much that he ended up grabbing the wrong kind of attention. He got robbed of the wand and murdered in his sleep. The middle brother took his stone back home and brought to life the woman he had loved. However, when that did actually happen, only the woman's soul, filled with sorrow and contempt, was able to come back. She didn't want to stay with the living and ached to go back to the afterlife. Since she wasn't technically alive, the middle brother couldn't feel happy even after bringing her back, so he took his own life and decided to join his beloved in the afterlife. As for the youngest brother, Death never managed to find him. He was the only one who had done the impossible feat of fooling Death. The invisibility cloak kept him hidden for years, until one day, he finally decided to take the cloak off and greet Death like an old friend. So, did the treasure really exist? If it did, why didn't it send other people on a wild goose hunt? I know I would have set out to seek these objects. The Deathly Hallows, as they come to be known later on. Many dismiss the brothers' story as nothing more than a myth, right? A tale meant for children. After all, their story was found in the most famous fairy tale book in the wizarding world, the Tales of Beedle the Bard. But some believed otherwise. They were convinced that the legend was real and that the objects described in it held the power to make one the master of death. Those holding opposing views were small in number, but many of them were notorious and powerful wizards like Voldemort, Dumbledore, and even Xenophilius Lovegood. However, the story never caught on as a real tale, and the so-called treasures remained hidden from the world. But here's where things become a little bit intense. These brothers did actually exist, and everything that happened to them in the story was as real as the legends went. The brothers were the Peverell brothers, the first known wizarding family to become extinct in the male line. While their surname completely got lost in history after a few generations, their bloodline continued to live on. The Peverell family had many descendants through their female line. However, only two families could be identified by the 20th century because of their heirlooms. The first family was the Gaunts, and the second was the Potters. Marvolo Gaunt was a descendant of the Peverell bloodline from his mother's side. He had an heirloom to prove his ancestry, which was a ring with the Peverell coat of arms. At least, that's what he called the strange sign on the ring. Other people called it the sign of the Deathly Hallows. The ring was transferred from one generation to the other and ultimately fell into the hands of Voldemort. He turned it into a Horcrux in hopes of it being relatively more powerful due to it being part of the Deathly Hallows. What Voldemort failed to realize was that that was the Resurrection Stone. which was hidden within the very ring he turned into a Horcrux. It was never of any interest to him though. After all, he had no desire to bring people back to life. Maybe that's why he never actively sought it out. The other descendant was the Potter family. Ignotus Peverell had a granddaughter named Iolanthe Peverell. She was a beautiful woman who ultimately got hold of the invisibility cloak that her grandfather had given to his son. She lived in Godric's Hollow and married a man named Hardwin Potter. Although the cloak was a big family secret, she couldn't help but share the burden of this treasure with her husband. According to the tradition of the Peverell family, even the possession of the cloak was kept in the dark. Hardwin didn't run away with the cloak. Instead, he honored the tradition of his wife's family and passed the cloak from one Potter child to the next. Ultimately, it fell into the hands of James Potter, and then went on to Harry. That brings us to the big question. Could the two greatest rivals in wizarding history actually be connected to each other by blood? But before we go ahead and dive into that, take a moment to please subscribe to the channel. It's completely free and ensures you never miss out on our exciting Harry Potter content. So, believe it or not, it is indeed true. Voldemort and Harry are related, and the connection falls back to the Peverell brothers. Voldemort was the descendant of Cadmus Peverell, the middle brother who asked for the Resurrection Stone from death. On the other hand, Harry was a descendant of Ignotus Peverell, the man who asked for the invisibility cloak from death. However, there's something about this distant connection that stands out. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort and Harry seem to mirror their ancestors in a way that, well, it's kind of hard to ignore. You see, you'd think that Voldemort was like the elder Peverell brother, who was ambitious and was willing to cheat death itself to gain power. But he was, in essence, much better represented by the second brother, his ancestor, Cadmus Peverell. The Dark Lord managed to come back from death because of his Horcruxes, but he wasn't technically alive and lived a cursed life. He never understood the preciousness and fragility of a life and always aimed to cheat death. Kind of like Cadmus Peverell and his inability to accept his beloved's mental state after the forced resurrection. Just like Cadmus, Voldemort believed he could outwit death and return to life, but the reality was far different. He could definitely escape death's grasp, but only briefly, and ultimately, according to death's own terms. In the end, he existed in a state that was neither truly alive, nor was it at peace. Exactly like Cadmus's poor lover. Which goes to show that, like everyone who had ever been resurrected by the stone, Voldemort was never meant to truly belong among the living. On the other hand, Harry seemed to mirror Ignotus Peverell. He was well represented by the invisibility cloak that he received from his line of ancestors. He didn't have the dark desire to cheat death or any wild ambitions to chase immortality. Like his ancestor, he only defeated death by humbly accepting that it was a part of life that he had to go through. That's also why Harry ultimately became the Master of the Deathly Hallows. During the last battle between Voldemort and Harry, the Dark Lord didn't perish simply because the Horcruxes were eliminated. It was because he had no power over his saving grace, the Elder Wand. That was his last bet against the good guys. But in typical Voldemort fashion, he was only after the wand to defeat death and claim power. Harry, on the other hand, didn't have the same ambitions. His goals were pure and out of the goodness of his heart. That's why he ended up becoming its true master. Additionally, it wasn't just the heirlooms that tied the two wizards together. People believed that the story of the three brothers left many effects on Harry and Voldemort, to the point that everything about the tale mirrored the lives of the duo. If you think about it, you can't help but agree. Both Harry and Voldemort's destinies were linked to death. They both died and came back to life, almost cheating death, right? They were both handed a gift from death. It wasn't directly, but they were handed down the gifts from their ancestors who were awarded the objects from death. Near the end, when Harry finally became the Master of Death, the Hallows appeared to follow the same fate as they did when the Peverell brothers passed away. One of the Deathly Hallows, the Resurrection Stone, was lost in the forest and was unfortunately forgotten forever. The Elder Wand, on the other hand, met a completely different fate. In the movies, Harry breaks the wand. However, in the books, it is shown that the wand could never be fully destroyed, so Harry places it back into Dumbledore's tomb, where its power will eventually die. The last Hallow, the invisibility cloak, seems to have had the best fate of all the treasures. It remains in the Potter family and is passed down through generations, just as the youngest Peveril brother intended. It's a fascinating connection, isn't it? What are your thoughts on this theory? Share your take on the comments, and as always, stay curious, stay magical, and don't forget to subscribe for more Wizarding World deep dives. And I'll catch you next time.